Hey guys, in this video, let's talk about style. Meanwhile, in the background, we can watch this Toyota Supra painting I was working on last week come together. Anyways, enjoy this painting, and I'm gonna enjoy some coffee. Let's talk a little bit about style. Both finding your style and... Man, this is a really interesting one to try to intro. Style in artwork is naturally kind of what draws us towards something. But if you're the artist, you kind of want to have your own individual thing. Actually, you pull inspiration from tons of different stuff. And it might not seem like it, but a lot of the artists that I follow are more like portrait artists or landscape artists. You might not think that I'm a big fan of Picasso or Banksy because it doesn't show in my artwork, but those are artists that I really, really like. What you like doesn't necessarily have to be what you paint or what you draw. Those influences don't have to play a big role. There's aspects of them that you can like. But it's my neighbor opening his garage door. Just because you like an artist or what they do doesn't mean that you have to replicate it. Something that I wrote in my journal a million years ago that I refer to often is that you don't have to replicate everything you see. And this was really a note to myself because there's a lot of art that I follow that I like. I actually don't even follow that many automotive artists. Most of the artists that I follow are portrait artists or graffiti artists. And while it's stuff that I like and I feel like I'm pretty well capable of, it's not necessarily how I want to depict the cars in my artwork. So I always have to try to find the balance between artwork that I enjoy looking at versus the artwork that I like to actually do. The process that I use is so much based on my experience and the tools that I like that what I see that might be really, really cool may not be easily, achieved in the method that I like, and that's okay. Something else to think about is inspiration. For me, I pull a lot of inspiration from video games, from comic books, from cartoons. I don't really find realism to be all that interesting, to be perfectly honest. So I'm always kind of playing that delicate balance of what looks good, what's believable, what's got really, really good detail, but sometimes I'll overdo it on certain aspects. So I like heavy outlines around stuff. I might not go big bold outlines around everything, but there's areas where I'm going to use some line work to really, really tighten some stuff up. But I'll leave some stuff out of focus and then I'll tighten up certain areas just because I want to create a point of interest. And I'll let realism kind of guide the direction, but I'm making stylistic decisions as I go because I want this to have a certain look and this to have a certain look. I'm really more focused on the back corner, that tail light section and the bumper around. Later as I get towards the end, you'll see the front area of the car and the outside area of the car are more or less out of focus. They're less detailed. They'll have some finished information, but I really want to key into the details in the middle. I want to create sort of a faux depth of field and over detail the middle. I just really, really like the way that looks. Something else I think about when I'm getting into a painting is spontaneity versus planned. I love to really just jump into something, and that's why you'll see the beginning stages are really splashy and messy. Of course, those stages are guided by the initial line work. This is where the car is going to land on the canvas in the composition. So I'm going to shoot the main colors down and then some background stuff, and I want that to be pretty splashy and actiony because it'll be harder later on the method that I use to come up with the spontaneity after the fact. I want to start with more of a mess because I know pretty much no matter what I do, I can detail it and kind of get it to where I want it to go. It's really just a matter of time. If I do something really, really, really precise and then I try to splash some creativity onto that, it has a different look. And I've actually done this in paintings before, so I kind of have a different feel of how it goes. Sometimes if I lean too much into the realism, I feel like, it's not that interesting, so I gotta mess it up a little bit to make it more interesting. And it does feel a little bit after the fact. It's not really a bad thing, it's just I'm probably the only person that notices, to be perfectly honest. I noticed that if I start with the splashy, expressive stuff, not only do I get to let that result sort of breathe through the entire rest of the painting, I don't have to work around it, I can work with it. It also actually tends to make the process more interesting to watch. Now, at the beginning of the process, you don't really know what it's going to look like in the end, and that's a very honest way to say how I paint. I don't 100% know what it's going to look like in the end, so all the random fun that I want to have, I really want to have it in the beginning so I can spend the rest of the painting turning it into hopefully what I think it should look like. And that's actually an interesting way to talk about how the order that you paint might actually have an impact on the overall look. Starting messy versus starting clean. I follow portrait artists that will start with the eyes or start with the mouth. And a lot of times I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense for my process. I love seeing that and I love watching it come together that way. But I think, wow, if I started with the details, I would have to work around those details for the rest of the artwork. I've done it before just as an experiment to see how it works. And it's cool because you get to challenge yourself a little bit. And I think when you're working in oils, there's a little bit more of that path that can sort of fit that a little bit better. But this random splashy acrylic nature that I like to work, you really wanna, I like to do the details last, is pretty much the answer here. I like that mess in the beginning and I like the details at the end because it creates for me what feels like a very linear process. I know that I'm getting towards the end of something as the details are coming together. If I start with the details, I am essentially working around them and kind of hoping that the rest of this stuff will work out. It can, but the result that I get is because of the order that I work in, and I think that's true for all artists. Another thing that really makes a difference in style is the tools that you use. The paint that you select, the size brushes that you select, these all make a huge difference in style. Something that's more painterly versus something that's more smooth and realistic. And that comes down to medium as well. In the case of this painting, I'm using just acrylic. I'm also using an airbrush, I'm using paint brushes, I'm using pinstripe brushes, liners. There's such a mix of stuff here, and all of that comes from the experience I've had over the 10 minutes I've been painting. I used to do custom airbrushing on cars and motorcycles for a living, so the airbrush is a very comfortable tool for me to use to do all the transition work, all the blending. I used to do that in all the rendering artwork as well. Paintbrushes and paints for me largely take the place of markers from when I was doing illustration work. I will still mix most paints to be somewhat transparent to kind of act like markers do, because I kind of want to translate that process just on a larger, more splashy scale if I can. But the mix of those tools, you know, using the airbrush where I think the airbrush needs to be used, using the paintbrush where I think the paintbrush needs to be used, and then the liners and the fine liners at the end where I think the details need to be accomplished, that makes a huge difference on style. If I use one tool through everything, there'd be nothing wrong with that. The style would be very different because of it. It's the mix of stuff that I use together that yields the result. But the car itself, the composition, the colors, can completely dictate the style, or at least the direction I want to go with something like this. The fun thing to do is to experiment and just kind of see where that takes you. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed the artwork. I'll see you on the next one. Is that a